So where are you from, Adam? Sorry.
I have a podcast.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's called Filmwax Radio, and
Okay.
I've been doing it for a long time,
Awesome.
I guess. And it's here, just
Sure. So, speaking of the machine,
yeah,
as Strom Thurmond used to say. Do you remember that?
I tried to not
That was during
to soak in as much as very much of what Strom Thurmond used to say.
That was during the Anita Hill thing.
Professor
Hill, can you talk into the machine? Can you talk? I can't hear. Can you talk?
The machine. Yeah, it was all just machines.
Yeah.
If it didn't have blood.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just listen to you. Just say something.
Testing.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay.
1, 2.
Running around a lot.
Yes.
I thought I had an opening, like some sort of
Soliloquy?
opening remarks. Not a soliloquy exactly, but no, it's a thrill because the idea behind this is to kind of talk about independent film, art film, and films that don't get quite as much usually attention, and certainly documentaries fall under that category as well. They usually can use as much help as they can get. So just hold that up to hear. They're not as dynamic as
they seem.
Yeah, as they seem. Oh, so this is what I was going to say actually. Since you brought up Senator Thurmond, is this is a nice day to meet. It turns out could have gone a very different way, but I feel I'm in a good mood today.
Wasn't the greatest day, but it's it's a better day than the day before.
Right, and a better day than it could have been if it went.
Oh yes,
south on us.
It looked a little wonky there at the start.
Well, that's the problem. You can never really, in this day and age, rely on the predictions, the polls, and all that.
Yeah, but those that Florida Georgia governor's race were weird, and the Senate race. It was the Senate race in Florida even more so. That I think was disappointing too, because just the whole balance shifted more so than we would like. I would think. In the opposite direction in the Senate. Yeah.
These are dark days, let's make no mistake.
Yeah.
It's just that maybe there's a little less darkness today.
And there's a little bit of accountability.
Yeah, right.
A lot of accountability, actually.
Exactly. So it would have been kind of like challenging to meet today, but I would have still looked forward to it. Yeah. I'm just glad.
Cool.
Well, I think we're talking about game night, aren't we? No, that's not right. I'm sorry. My notes, sorry, that was the wrong notes.
Yeah, we could.
Well, it's funny because I did make a note. That's quite a striking difference in between those the two films that you're more. Maybe these are your two most recent projects, but more or less anyway, right? But that's I guess what you do. Right?
Yeah,
that's what.
Well, I shot a film called OG.
Oh right.
After finishing Westworld in 2016. I think we finished in like April, something like April, May. Then I went to do OG, which we shot in a maximum security prison out in Indiana, largely with incarcerated men in the cast. Then I went to do another film, a film called Monster, here in New York, and that was like late summer, early fall. Then I started working on this, not on the film, but on the theatrical event that we put on with the vets.
Yeah, Theater of War?
No. We're Not Done Yet.
No, right. Okay, I'm getting a little confused. The what we see at the end of the
right. That process started then.
Right.
And then I went, I guess, took a little bit of a break, then went to do Emilio Estevez's movie, The Public, then went to do Hold the Dark. That was like February, April. And then after that, I did Game Night, which was kind of a little bit of a respite from all of this stuff, which was a little heavier. But actually, it was more stressful. Doing Game Night was more stressful than doing this stuff.
Because
dying is easy, comedy's hard,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a remarkable, that kind of schedule.
Well, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I guess so. The documentary short, which we're here to talk about today, which is we're at the office of HBO, is called We Are Not Done Yet, and it is a passion project of yours, I guess, right? Where you've gotten a group of veterans together who are suffering from PTSD or some sort of psychological harm from either their time served or since, and it's about the catharsis that they're experiencing, right, with this poetry project. I don't know how well I described it. Maybe you do better.
Well, they're a group of 10 veterans who use the written word as a means of confronting and processing trauma, and as a means of healing themselves and healing one another. They work down in arts therapy workshops led by a poet named Seema Reza, who works out of Walter Reed Military Hospital outside of D.C., and also Fort Belvoir. And these were kind of the elite unit, if you will, of the writers that she worked with. And one of them had an idea that it would be additive to the healing process if they did these poems in public, if they did a staged reading of a collective poem that they had written together. And long story short, I came down, how I came to this, but I came down and helped direct them through this process, and the documentary is born out of that.
Or were you familiar with Seema's poetry, with this project at Walter Reed beforehand? How did you initially connect with her, or with this with the group?
Well, I had started doing a group of. I had started working with a group called Theater of War that does readings of the Greek tragedies as a means of inspiring conversation around PTSD.
I'm rude. I just got to insert one little thing, and then I'll get. Yeah. I was at a Theater of War event this weekend. Oh, wow. Coincidentally, in Brooklyn.
Oh, wow.
Around Antigone. Yeah. In Antigone and
but around
Ferguson.
Gun violence. Right?
Yes.
I was supposed to do that one, but I had to be in D.C. So Brian, rings me up. Brian Dory rings me up every once in a while and says, "Well, will you come do this reading?" And I say I either can or I can't. Right. So we do. He does these in military communities, but also in inner cities as examination of the consequences of war and also the consequences of gun violence on local communities. And his argument is that. From a military perspective, that the Greeks were a warrior society who chronicled war, the challenges and the victories through these works, and that they took on these stories as a collective in the amphitheater in Athens. And not only did they take on the upside, the celebratory side of war, if there is one, I suppose there can be, but they also took on the consequences of war. For example, I read Ajax, whose story regards him returning home from battle and having this what might be described as a psychotic fit and killing everyone, within arm's reach. And Brian's argument is that that's an examination of PTSD.
Yeah.
And so I did, but his further argument is, and the argument that I derive from it, is that we don't do that in American society. We don't take on these stories of the consequences as a collective. Rather, we kind of we talk about war and the troops and the vets in platitudes, and we flash, the kind of superficial, symbols of patriotism at them, but we don't really listen to them. And even at, something like the Presidential Medal of Honor ceremony, which is always, I'm always moved by hearing those stories of those veterans and what they did, their acts of valor, whether they're there or whether it's read posthumously. But even in those settings, we don't hear from the veteran. They don't speak. Somebody else reads the citation, and the president, or in our case, the guy who's in there now, hands them the medal, and and they move on. So, but we rarely hear firsthand about the complexities of war, about the injury that war inflicts on the human psyche, as well as on the body. And so I did one of these readings, one of these Theater of War readings down in D.C., and there were some representatives from the Pentagon there. And I just happened to ask if there's anything else that comes up that I might be able to, lend a hand to, would you let me know? somehow I passed the vetting process with the Department of Defense. And a few weeks later, a couple months later, they called me up and said there's a poet named Seema Reza. She works with a group of veterans, and one of them wants to do a play. Will you come down and direct them?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah.
Yeah.
And I came down, put my theater experience in my backpack, and brought it to bear with them. And it was in the end, it was a great privilege. It was one of the great privileges of my career.
Wow, I can understand that. You see, like, an immediacy to how I mentioned the word catharsis earlier, but you can actually see it unfolding in front of you. I can imagine, and participating in that could be very rewarding, and some of them, I guess, are experiencing some level of healing through this process, right? That's the hopes anyway. There's a moment in there I remember where you're directing them, like, that's not working. Whatever, you need to. You treated them like you would probably if you were directing any actors. Is that, or can you say that?
Well, I treated them, yes, as collaborators, but obviously, there was a very delicate space. And, I don't think Seema would have allowed me into the room if it didn't seem that I was aware of that. So I treated them as collaborators, but they you like in any situation that you find yourself in working in this way, you have to be able to adapt.
Yeah.
And I think I had to really crank up my empathetic antenna on this.
Right.
And but at the same time, they were so powerful as artists, and so respectful and celebrating of this opportunity, and they were so committed to it, and clearly they really wanted to do this. They needed it. I think one of the things that the film highlights, particularly at a time in which we are cynical about this, is the importance and the real value of art. This for them is not a frivolous exercise. It's not an indulgence, and they're not just playing make-believe. That wasn't their desire on that stage. Their desire was to use this as a tool in a real objective way toward healing themselves and healing one another. And so they took it seriously. They speak about art in life and death terms. There's no bullshit.
Yeah.
So they wanted to work, and I was more than happy to be there helping them through it.
And you yourself also had to learn from them, right, about how they were presenting themselves as soldiers, or as veterans, right? That
was the thing that was really impactful for me, is to understand that even though there is a sense that they've been betrayed, perhaps
by the institution,
by these institutions.
Yeah.
At the same time, they honor what they did. They served, as A.B. describes, with duty, honor, respect, and that they were fully committed. And I think that makes the betrayal that much harder. And so, yes, there's a process. Like any process, you have to problem solve when you're working on a scene, and they made it plain to me. Particularly one of them, Bobby Plagman, made it plain to me that the direction that I was giving them was not necessarily the most effective and needed to be much clearer. And I love that moment that Serene captured that, because Serene Harabedian is our director, and she was kind of quietly in the corner filming what was happening with another cameraman, or one or two on occasion. And Serene was invited by Seema Reza because she wanted to bear witness. Seema wanted to capture this as a kind of bearing witness to what we were doing, and also perhaps put a short film together to market the work, and perhaps maybe to fundraise too. But it wasn't the intent to do this documentary. So we weren't really paying attention to what Serene was doing. We were just working on our project. And so she very kind of unobtrusively capture.
Right.
And I was so glad that she captured that moment. She captured everything, obviously, but we put that moment in the film because it highlights the ways in which how seriously they take their training and their service. It highlights, too, the ways in which they have been shaped by that training. And it also showed a trajectory toward trust between all of us. And it just showed it was a wonderful starting point and a kind of touchstone for the evolution of the process of making the film. Or rather putting on that theatrical piece that the film highlights.
Yeah, these guys really put themselves out there at the end of the day, because not only were they making themselves, they were in the most vulnerable place possible, putting their emotional lives out there in the terms of the writing, the poetry or the writing, the prose, as well as the performance of it. But then there's a documentary on top of that, so it adds a whole other, dimension to it. And most documentaries get to be seen by, hopefully several thousand, maybe tens of thousands of people. But on HBO, it's a much bigger audience. So, these guys are really, but maybe it'll feel very, at the end, very gratifying that their stories are out there, and
I think
many more people will see them.
Well, I think one thing to remember is that the film is only a snapshot of who they are. And what they've described to me that's I find pretty interesting is that they can look at the film now and see where they were. So even within the film, you can see a progress toward healing for them. But that was 2 years ago. So they're well past that now. So, yes, they're putting themselves out again, and it's always weird, when you put yourself on film and then you put it out to an audience because it's out there and you don't know how it's going to be responded to. But at the same time, I think they have an opportunity to inspire a larger, more productive conversation around our societal responsibility toward veterans, toward those who served but are injured by it in quiet, unseen ways. And I think as well they potentially have the opportunity to inspire perhaps a more sensitive and enlightened political conversation. What we saw in the election last night was a large number of veterans on the Democratic side representing their districts in the House. And so there's an opportunity to have a much more sophisticated conversation now, or at least begin to, that goes beyond the platitudes and the campaign slogan manipulation of veterans' issues and the kind of the political manipulation of and weaponizing of the troops.
Right.
And I think they have an opportunity to contribute that in a way that doesn't only work toward their own ends, but works toward the ends of veterans, the many thousands of veterans who are out there like them. And I think that they are desirous of that. So while this is a complicated process of putting yourself on stage and then further putting yourself on a national stage, I think that as soldiers, as people who serve, who look out for one another as part of their ethos, I think what would be most gratifying for them is if their being open allowed a greater openness for their colleagues out in our society who have not been to this point. And if they can reach out through this film and maybe help a few of them along the way, then I think I think they'll be pleased with that.
You're good. That was great. In light of that, this documentary, We Are Not Done Yet, is premiering on HBO as we sit and speak. I can say it's tomorrow, Thursday, November 8th, 9 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock, thank you. 7 o'clock Central.
Yeah.
And it's a great counterbalance, if you will. Well, first of all, Veterans Day is coming right up next Monday, I think, right?
We celebrated it Sunday. But we celebrated on Monday. Yeah.
Okay. And that we're sending troops down to the Mexican border, is ludicrous.
It's insane.
It's insane. So
it's a dishonoring of the troops, and it's political. It's a weaponizing of the troops, and when we're told that a conversation when NFL players are trying to start a conversation around police brutality. By taking this gesture, before, when the national anthem plays, we're told that that's a disrespecting of the troops. But the troops didn't have anything to do with that conversation. That was about police brutality. Now we have a conversation around immigration that's being maligned by the manipulation of troops who are being inserted into a situation that they have nothing to do with. And what are we asking them to do? Are we asking them to go down and fire on women and children? Mm-hmm. Have they not had enough? We've been at war for 2 decades now, and I think it's vulgar. I think it's so below the honorable nature of the men and women who serve our country. And our politicians, particularly at the highest level now, behave in such a way that's not deserving of spit shining these people's boots. And it's dangerous, it's wrong, and I'm glad to see that there are more veterans involved now on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, for that matter, who can speak firsthand about how ridiculous this type of manipulation, this type of rhetoric coming out of the White House is, and this use of our military. It's wrong, and everybody with with 2 good eyes and a sensible brain can see that. I'm just pissed off about it.
I hear you, and I don't blame. I'm right there with you. We're so close to the surface of so much anger, and it's hard to channel that in a constructive. That's what, in a way, I'm glad that you said that, because making this documentary is a constructive way of channeling this anger.
I think that the constructive thing about the documentary too is that we hear firsthand from these veterans a more nuanced and complicated perspective on who they are, on who the troops are, on who the vets are. We hear it from them as opposed to from the politicians and the blowhards, and they have an opportunity. They have an opportunity to slice through this noise in a way that I think will be heard, because there's no arguing the authenticity of their voices. And while we may be living in a place in our society now where we're celebrating the authenticity of lies, I think that they have an authenticity that's built on certainly on personal truth and on what is fact. And so I look forward to their being able to share that perspective, particularly now with a larger American audience than just the audience that we had in that theater, that 500-seat theater down in D.C.
Jeffrey Wright, thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.